Today I want to talk a fairly simple modification for people who have difficulty doing some exercises in the prone position because of wrist pain. Some of you may recall that 5 years ago I had a bad wrist fracture that sidelined me from seeing patients for about 6 weeks, so that's a modification that I've since then learned to do for myself. The problem that people have is when they have to put a lot of weight on a wrist in what we call a fully extended position. We end up having a lot of compressive forces in some of the carpal bones. So for example, that becomes an issue when people are in the tabletop position and they're trying to do a cat and cow, or when people are starting to do planking activities, which is very common in yoga, and they have to be in this position and it's just not feasible. So we have a couple modifications. For the tabletop position, which doesn't put so much body weight on your wrist, you can simply make a fist and apply pressure to your knuckles instead of your wrist. And that way you're going to keep your wrist in a fully neutral stacked position. So you would do your cat and cow with your knuckles and curled up wrist just underneath your shoulders, and you can usually do that very comfortably. When it comes to doing a planking position, I think the simplest and really probably the only available way to do that is to get a retrofit tool called a yoga wedge. And this is what this is. This happens to be mine, so I've added some non-grip tape on it. But what this basically is a piece of very dense foam that is like a triangle. What this will allow us to do is it will allow us to take our wrist from being in full extension to decrease the angle and take some of the pressure from the dorsal carpals. So here's what it would look like. You would be in a plank position, the angle of your wrist is reduced, and you can even improve that a little bit by angulating or articulating backwards to limit the angle. And this is usually, this will make it comfortable enough to do things like a chaturanga or full or partial plank. You can also use it if you do reverse tabletop or reverse plank, in which case you just put the wedge behind you and it would then again reduce from a full extension angle to something that's more shallow. And this time you would be angulating back a little bit to limit the pressure on the wrist. Incidentally, the yoga wedge has one other usefulness that a lot of people enjoy for people who have really tight Achilles when they're trying to do squatting maneuvers. You put your heels on the wedge and it will bring the floor a little closer to you and sometimes make it more comfortable to do a squat.